Hello, Ree. How are you?
I'm so good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. To be honest, like I have you here after the conference, and I feel like we should talk about the conference. And didn't get to talk enough at the event in Barcelona, but we're here for a very, very different purpose. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm really good, and I'm still riding high off the buzz of Fair, as I think a lot of people were. It was such a good event. You did such a great job.
Thank you so much for being with us. For everybody joining us on Fair Dialogues, it's been a minute since we've done these episodes, but we have a good reason to restart. We have 3 amazing sessions scheduled, and we're starting with Rhiannon here. I would love a little bit of a comment from you on LinkedIn Live. Is it working? Because we're having some technical difficulties in the background. So do let us know if something is cutting off. I hope we will run smoothly for the next hour. But I'm also very curious, what are you doing now when you're listening or seeing this session? Because I think we're all multitasking. So whenever I sign up for something that is on, I usually do something else, whether it's mails, programming, my next day, as usually at the end of the day. So comment a little bit online to see what everybody is up to and what is distracting you from this very important conversation with Rhiannon. But most importantly, I think everybody's signaling that it's all good, is working. So no worries. You have the floor. Great.
We've got the floor. Great.
Where are you now? You're in Amsterdam, back?
Yeah, Harlem. I'm as far away as I could be from my children, who are on the bottom floor, and I'm hoping that will be enough distance between us at this time of night.
At this point, these tools that have super noise cancellation in echo cancellation, I'm very much relying. I actually live on basically on top of a school field. So if you would hear the noise that I hear, it would be like 6 classrooms outside doing sports, and they're all like 9 years old. So
That's not really up my vibe, to be honest. No, it's the quiet. I need the quiet and the peace to work.
amazing. Thank you so much, Carly, Lynn, Marie Claire, for signaling that everything is all right. We're going to kick it off. We have a lot of content that we want to cover for this session. Ree here has been a wonderful moderator and partner for our conference in Barcelona, the annual Workplace Inclusion Conference that happened on the 15th of May. I can't believe it's already been a month. So I really wanted to make sure that we have Ree also for the online community that we're at Fair Cultures. She's done, is this like, maybe you tell more about the research that you're doing, but I'm very, very eager to see what the TruthWorks is coming up with for your audience. And we're very happy to share with ours as well about resilience. So on the back of the conversations from Barcelona, we wanted to make sure that we bring some of these insights that for me are a bit new in this space. I think we talk a lot about leadership, strength, performance, efficiency, a lot of these, buzzwords when it comes to running successful businesses and especially around talent management. And I see not enough around resilience. I'm very, very happy you as the expert. For everybody who doesn't know you, can you do a little intro?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and I hope you're all having a good day. I'm Rhiannon Stroud, co-founder at TheTruthWorks, an organisational culture consultancy based here in the Netherlands, but with clients and colleagues all over. We've become known for our radical honesty in this space, actually. It's something that's really important to us to really try and rebuild that trust between colleagues and organisations. And we think the way to do it is through honesty and creativity. And those are two of our core values. So when I'm not keeping my children away from me whilst I'm trying to work, I spend my time working with clients on complex strategic culture briefs. Everything from how to build resilient organizations through to high agency, high performance, well-being, ED&I, employee experience as a whole spectrum, really.
And I would love to be a fly on the wall in your sessions, but I cannot do that. Therefore, we're doing this session today. For me, I think when I think about this topic, a lot of the times a bit of a misunderstanding around the idea of values and let's say organizational values. And I know you and Emily have been doing for years a lot of work around this to really tell it as it is, it show up in people's behaviors, in people's kind of way of taking decisions, of interacting at work. And I think a lot of us, probably even on this call, have been in organizations where most leaders think about culture as values on a wall, those beautifully designed, printed pieces of words stringed together. But you talk about resilience specifically as a secret ingredient. And I'm a little bit curious, based on your work, what does resilience look like in practice in the workplace?
That's a good question. And it is different per organisation, but I've spent months researching this. As you said, we've got a white paper coming out next week, actually, early next week. You can sign up now to get access to that. But it was something I really wanted to try and tackle and get to the bottom of, because we were starting to get more resilience briefs into the business, and it felt like a thing that the answer was kind of doing a toolkit for colleagues of how to be resilient and teaching them strategies. And that is absolutely one way of doing it, but it should be, on reflection, it should have been one thing in a wider strategy. And that was really the catalyst for me to start researching sort of modern day resilience and what it means when it comes to the workplace. So I spoke with CEOs, CPOs, spoke with yourself, psychologists, AI doctors, burnout experts, really a huge range of different perspectives that all helped me validate this kind of central thought, which is that resilience cannot be demanded. It has to be designed for. And that's kind of at the heart of the thinking that we are sharing next week, which is that organizational resilience, it's what shows up when the pressure hits. So when you said, what does it look like in practice? It's whether your structures, ways of working, leadership behaviors, team dynamics are designed to absorb pressure, or whether they sort of like quietly disintegrate or quietly pass down to other individuals. There'll be different things for different organizations. What resilience is not is a vibe. So what
not a vibe.
Yeah, I vibe so much now, and I quite like it as a way to describe culture, especially that a sort of intangible feeling that you can't really put your fingers on of culture, and you can't really describe. But resilience is not. Culture could be described in vibes and measured by vibes. Resilience, in my opinion, can't. Resilience is a system, and it's either built or it's not an organization. And I think it's missing from a lot of culture conversations these days, because resilience is invisible when it's working, right? You don't notice good policy until it protects you. We had that there from one of the guys at Google saying he didn't realize this thing was there until he really needed it.
Yeah.
You don't notice a sustainable workflow until you're not burning out. But why would you notice that? You notice it when it's not there. It's sort of conspicuous absence. So really, to answer your question, what does it look like in practice? Well, it's one that's not relying on heroics. It's one that's consistent and clear and designed to bend without breaking.
And I'm trying to kind of map it in my mind, right? Are we talking, when we talk about this type of infrastructure, this type of system, right? We're going to get into what you found out. But for me, I think what I've witnessed in organizations that were able to rebound after crisis, of this elasticity, was, I think, on one side, the sense of we're in this together and we all have a certain level of responsibility to rebound, right? If that's where we are, but in a way that maybe we don't need to go back to what we were. We kind of need to rebuild as well for a new phase, right?
Yeah, like to reset and renew. And there'll be a few things that in the framework that we offer. It's sort of based around this idea of a tree with roots, trunk, and leaves. And the roots is the organizational layer, systems, leadership, policy. Trunk is the team layer. And then the leaves is the visible outcomes, of course, the colleagues, the bit that we usually put the responsibility onto. But around that, there are these things that we call resilience multipliers. And that's exactly what you've just described, Joanna. It's purpose, communication, sometimes it's ED&I. It really depends on the organization, but those are the things that really let resilience sort of take root and thrive. A little bit like, when you have a pot plant that just can't survive in the high performing environment that is your home. And you don't really know why. There will have just been something that wasn't quite right. And in the sort of resilience world, that actually is one of these multipliers that won't have been set up for success.
Yeah. You also started this conversation with what resilience is not. And I always love this framework because I don't think we do that enough, right? We tell people how it is, what they should do, but sometimes that leaves a lot of interpretation. It also leaves a lot for like nuance that might end you up in a different direction. And I think what I see a little bit of that is some lead organizations, they make their own brainstorming. They find, okay, these are our top 5 values or the top 5 priorities that we want to instill in our culture, etc., etc. But sometimes it ends up a little bit theatrical, like a performance. We always have this fear that it doesn't have enough substance. So I'm curious from your perspective, like where does it, because it does start a little bit like a show, right? But then it should become something, and it should become something as part of the day to day. So what's the connect, and what's the bridge from this performative, hey, this is the display, this is what we've kind of come up with, to are we living it, are we living by it?
Honestly, I think that's a really easy answer. I think it's the design, it's the system. For me, culture theatre happens when there's too much performance, like you say, and not enough infrastructure. And, one of the first things that we ask people, when clients that we're working with, when they're working on some big launch or something new and exciting, is, okay, and where is it actually baked into the organization? Where can I actually see this being committed to at a level that's not just communicative? And you really see that with resilience. You really see as a topic in organizations, it's a really easy one just to slot into your narratives and to your requests of, our mindset of you this year, we really need you to be resilient, or we need to be a resilient organization in the face of change. These are such easy things to say, and actually, unless they have been designed into the system, the question always is like, has a shift in how decisions have been made? Has that happened? Has there been a shift in how pressure is handled or how success is rewarded? We see a lot of performative work, especially in the case of values and ED&I. Like, you only have to look at the Palestine and Gaza war, or the recent rollbacks in ED&I in the States, and there's so many sort of colleague activists and advocates now that are putting their hand up and saying, why are you being so quiet about this? Because we have a value that says this. And one of the things we do in our value work when we're working with exec teams and CEOs is put them to the test to say, well, let's solve a business problem you have right now. We just did it with a huge client and said, in the boardroom, give me your biggest problem that's keeping you awake at night right now. And then with these values, let's solve it. And if it can't you solve that problem, then not the right value set for you.
I feel it's not so easy. Like you say, like, this is easy. Or maybe it's easy, but it's slow. I'm not really sure where. Yeah,
well, I think that's what transformation is, Oana. Like, true change and transformation is slow and messy. I think, again, that's when you said, sort of shows and performance, they're neat, they're rehearsed, they've got makeup artists, they've got sound and lighting, right? Compare that level of like gloss and ease to true transformation. It's messy. One is neat and one is messy, right? And it's much harder to transform, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. That's where I agree with you there. So I do think so I'm trying to kind of translate this for myself, right? Like, if you have the infrastructure in place, it should be easy, but you should still expect a certain time and patience related to this transformation. Going back a little bit to the idea of what is resilience, and we very often talk about resilience when we hit the wall, where
Yes.
there's a cliff in front
Yeah.
of us, right? We either have failed already in some operational way, in some kind of reputational way, in some kind of way towards our clients, workforce, purpose, mission of our own organization. So there is a sense of failure. But in the same time, I think where I think about resilient cultures is how they actually handle that failure. What have you seen there? What
And
do
resilient people too. Wouldn't you say that about a person, Oana? You know, about how they sort of fight back in the case of adversity. I'd say it's the same. I think what I've observed the difference being is that cultures that are resilient don't tend to fear failure in the same way. It's treated more as an input to future decision making rather than an outcome. So I see it more as data in those organizations rather than an opportunity to get defensive or shut down or kind of rebrand the issue.
Mhm.
It's more seen as an opportunity to pause, listen, adjust, and crucially stay in the relationship with the people, even if it feels uncomfortable. I've got one client at the moment that refers to themselves as a jet make decisions like a jet ski. And I think what a smart way of describing how, and if you
What
knew
does
the
that
full,
mean? Because I don't do jet skis.
yeah, well, I think the full analogy would be like cruise ship, speedboat, jet ski,
Okay, got it.
in terms of like decision making
Yeah.
and speed, agility. But what I also see is a really smart way of thinking about changing your mind, pivoting and responding to failure, and being able to move like this quickly, you know, with agility and without too much fear of failure, of just making that next shift. Because I think what I've observed of resilient cultures is that they can't be resilient if they are only willing to sort of lead through the easy bits. Got to be able to call on that system and that design of the system the whole time.
I see somehow a lot of resemblance. So for those who don't know me here, I've worked on tech talent acquisition and been very, very close to tech departments and very techy kind of companies. And some of the most resilient ones, in my opinion, when it comes to even like people culture, had a bit this philosophy that coming from the technology piece around like take everything as an experiment almost, create a certain database of failures that teach you, that kind of show you how to maybe avoid bigger ones in there, or how to make analogies by proxy with certain other situations. And I think this was carried out throughout the organizational kind of DNA, but it was somehow driven, as you say, a little bit too in like two directions. One, they were the people who would just consistently be humble about the way they would take decisions or the way we would like to move forward, with the idea of like, hey, this is where we want to go, this is what we've done, but there's always a piece of unknown and we will take responsibility if this works or doesn't work, right? So there was a little bit of insurance as well, that yes, we might fail, but if we do fail, we will be kind of fixing it together and we will be at the helm of. Can you share a time maybe for you when you helped an organization rebuild after a culture initiative went wrong? I'm sure you've.
Which one to choose from, Oana? I think that I've got a good example at the moment actually, where we're working at sort of exco level, working on defining their strategy. But part of the reason why we're here is because a previous strategy failed to launch with colleagues. So I'm not necessarily saying it hasn't worked at a business level, but at a colleague level, it didn't have that rallying cry that it needed to have. And so when we looked at, basically it was sort of a back to basics strategy. I'm sure that we've heard lots of organizations talk about these, especially lately. Something that sounds very clear on paper, but in practice had kind of missed the mark a little bit. And I think the reason for that was because it sounds really simple, but you still have to give it a definition. And that's something I see a lot. High performance, high agency. Okay, high performance to you, Oana, is very different to what it is to me. Okay, so we've got to define each simple of language. And in this organization, they hadn't defined what the basics were or for whom. And I think instead of building confidence, they sort of hadn't addressed the underlying that had led to that noise and that pressure in the first place. So ended up really layering new messages on top of shaky foundations. And you know where that ends. It ends in cynicism and ends in disengagement. So you asked about the sort of rescue attempt. Well, the rescue attempt is really about slowing down, listening, getting practical, and anchoring the strategy around a much clearer, more realistic, clearly defined customer promise. And I like to refer to the messy middle of for clients and for us as business leaders is really showing visible progress, setting milestones, and doing so honestly and with clear communications, and then making sure that the exec team do actually follow through. They stick to those priorities, they communicate them clearly. And that for me is starting to build towards a more resilient way of communicating and sticking to a strategy, not sweeping declarations, but structure, clarity, accountability, rebuilding trust in that slow, unglamorous way that doesn't have headlines, taglines, and a campaign, but involves honest communication and delivering on what you said you will.
Not everything needs an award, right?
No.
I think we've had a phase of awards for everything, like the little kindergarten kids that for every little thing that they did well, they get a star and they go home with the card. We don't need, I love the idea of like, don't need to make everything glamorous and big campaigns and big communication. I think a more structured or honest conversation, and maybe even not necessarily one-on-one, but sometimes we see these top-down communications and there is an expectation that then they are absorbed, versus have I sat down with each department? Have I said those who didn't get it yet, right? Have I measured somehow where we are doing really well in terms of adoption, when we're not doing so well? Which are the teams or the departments which are bouncing back fast after some kind of crisis, and where are the others which I see out? I see absenteeism, I see toxic behaviors. Usually there are pockets. This is what I see in my experience, is not so much like everybody everywhere at the same time.
No, very rarely. But that's why the manager population is the most important communication channel you have. We see clients all over spend thousands, millions even on their comms channels, or reinvigorating them every few years, or now accompanying them with AI. And I just wish half the time and half the budget was spent on managers as the most important communication and engagement channel.
Yeah. And we had a big session on this actually on the on middle managers and investing them as a change agent for not just operational change, right? And efficiency and performance, but people and culture, which they are, to be honest, some of the biggest links and some of the strongest, if they are able to be, one, empowered, and two, educate, thing that needs to be done simultaneously. Going back to this, you started mentioning the idea of like building the resilient culture, and I feel there's always a little bit of a tension. I have been in some, let's say, leadership programs where you go in there and you do this self-analysis, and some specialists tell you what is your leadership style, and you almost feel like you need to oblige by it. Like, this is who I am, therefore this is how I should act all the time, or this, right?
Yeah.
And I feel sometimes like, because leaders and leadership programs and the way corporations are run today, I feel there is a little bit of a recipe somehow that leaders have been pushed into for decades, which most of the times means they should not show any vulnerability. They should not necessarily say what they mean. They should speak for the group, etc., etc. Like, again, there's a weird paradox there, and I don't think we are at the point of getting it right.
I think I do think it depends on the generation of leader that you're working with as well. I do find that especially leaders that have climbed through corporate systems, there is an old model of leadership that was built on a lot more certainty, and this idea of being unflappable, always composed, always clear, always having the answers. I find that today's reality is so much less clear and so much less certain and so much more changeable, that leaders have to be, and certainly resilient leaders have to be able to hold the uncertainty and the mess and the human with the composed, the professional, the leader. When we work with leaders, what we often say to them is, you don't have to have all the answers right now. What you do need to have, steady hand that people trust. And that means being honest about what you know, transparent about what you're still working out, of course, and I think calm enough to hold space for your team whilst they navigate the same ambiguity. And I think that's part of what a resilient organization can do really well, is notice that people at every level are going through change, and you can't just expect the leadership layer to be fine about it. They've got their own take on the change, and then they need to be able to process that and channel it productively in order to then be a strong leader as well. I think it depends on the leaders that you've got. And I think authentic leadership is obviously such a buzzword now, and it's so important. But there is a nuance to resilient leadership, and it's not necessarily about keeping everything together all of the time. It's sort of when to show strength and how to do it. I recently had a personal example of this where I probably won't surprise you to know I've got really high standards. I care deeply about excellence. I don't know if my colleagues would call me a perfectionist or not. Let me know in the chat. But I've always been, delivering really high quality work, like at high pressure, high pace works well for me. But recently I had feedback that sort of said, it doesn't really feel like I'm allowed to have a background you. It was really striking. And, this is from a person that has spent their whole career building culture and believing deeply in employee experience. Because perhaps where I thought I was maybe modeling resilience, what I was actually unintentionally sort of projecting a layer that said this is constant high performance. And that in itself has created pressure for the people around me. And that pressure could lead to a less resilient organization, because there's a huge difference for me, and I talk a lot about with clients, between resilience and endurance. And endurance is not a sustainable way of working, whereas resilience is.
I love that. And I think everybody on this call, do reflect on maybe what is your signal that you're sending to the peers, to the people that are in your teams, that maybe doesn't help the idea of being resilient as a team. I think this is a very interesting self-reflection that we can all make. I have already some things in my mind. I'm not going to share them here. It's not about me, it's about you, but I'll probably make a post afterwards, because I've just sparked a couple of things and I feel bad already. So I need to go and apologize.
For you.
Today, for example, I just woke up shattered. I don't know why. And I was like, I would love a day off, but I cannot take a day off. And in the end, I was like, I actually will be able to finish early. So I should just finish early at that, or do some extra breaks. My best assistant now, it's Claude, the AI. And I think we're going to go into some AI question as well there. But I think having somebody to tell you, tell your best friend or the colleague that you really respect and adore at work when they have a bad moment, a bad day, something that they're struggling with. Sometimes we don't tell that enough to ourselves, and that influences how people see us, right? And how we actually exhibit resilience and patience and structure. Sometimes we might show up.
What you've described there is recovery. What you're describing is a need for recovery, which is a completely acceptable concept in the world of sports and high and sports. It's much less acceptable in the world of work. And yet we're all doing the same thing. We're all pushing our boundaries. We're all going further than we had before, stretching our muscles more than they were yesterday. And recovery has not been built into most organizations because it tends to be viewed as a weakness or something that has to happen at the point of burnout. And I would love for the future organizations, I would love to start seeing recovery being built into what flexible looks like.
I think this is the big piece missing, and I cannot remember the quote now, but there was something around winners are built in the prep not on the day of performance almost. So there was a analogy like the most important part is the training and the recovery versus the day that it actually, you needed 100%. Yeah.
And any high performance, high endurance athlete would agree with that, but they're not a concept that we've yet brought into the workplace, I don't think.
No, we're like 150% every day. If it's possible, please do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I want to take a question because I feel we've been going really quick through a couple of topics that are really for our community, but I want to take a little bit of a breather. And I think we have here a question, and then we can go back to our usual program. We have time. We're moving in a very good rhythm. Thank you so much. And also, everybody, big round of applause for Rhi, because in the background, you probably don't see the LinkedIn Live, but in the background, every 5 seconds, we have our image refreshing. And I'm sure this is stressing you out. But it does it so.
Yeah, no, it's fine. The resilient organization is seeing me through. It's good.
So I'm glad, thank you for that.
See it.
We have here a question actually. Oh, sorry. Well, question is here. Do you think AI can enhance the resilience in organizations? Let's take this question and then we'll go back to our.
Good question. I think it will do both. And I think it will depend on how resilient your organization is in the first place. So to look at why I think it will hinder first, because it's just another change, right? And the truth is, the world has never been as fast changing as it is right now, but it's also never slow as it is right now. It's only going to get faster. And this is why resilience is such an important topic, because every organization is a change organization now. The days of having transformation projects are almost laughable. Like every organization is a transformation organization. And AI is just the next thing of that, okay, in terms of change. And so if your organization has not got the system designed to be able to thrive in change and not under pressure, I think that AI could hinder it. However, I see huge potential with AI, especially with regard to management. The top conversation we just had around the importance of middle managers in all areas, but particularly within building an organizational resilience. I think that it has a huge opportunity ahead of us now to really think about the role that it can play for HR, for people, for culture, how much an AI could be in terms of coaching, recovery tips, communication, self-awareness, self-diagnosis. I think there's a huge amount that it could do for us. And I think in ways, if it's embedded at the right parts of the organization, it will take some of the resilience pressure off. Only if it's embedded in the right way. And for it to be embedded in the right way, it's got to be designed into a system. And as we've discussed, so many organizations don't have the system in place in the first place.
Yeah. Somehow we often focus on this organizational resilience, the systemic, maybe redesign of how we plan to be resilient. But the culture behind that is made of individuals, people, humans. They have very different capacities of resilience, right? And I've struggled with this a lot in my own experience when managing teams or when kind of directing different departments or working cross-functionally, in balancing the support that people would get when they do struggle with change. While, let's say, my mandate would be push the organization forward. What's your perspective here?
Yeah, I think this is the layer that people often avoid because it feels so deeply personal and so subjective. And also it is, this is the messy bit. I don't think you can talk about resilience without talking about how people experience pressure and therefore resilience differently. I see Miriam has commented along these lines in the chat. I completely agree. What resilience means to me as a white woman in a position of leadership will look or might look totally different to a Black queer man navigating microaggressions whilst also trying to meet performance targets, or someone that doesn't feel safe to bring their true self to work. These are important parts of context, and context shapes capacity. I always say that to my clients: context shapes capacity. So many organizations miss that bit, and the response is by sending, and to be honest, this is actually a business that's trying. So many businesses aren't even trying yet, but the response is sending everyone on the same resilience training, rather than asking, what are we doing that's creating unnecessary strain, and how do they show up differently for different types of people, and what do different types of people need in order to build resilience on an individual level. That's why in our model, the resilience route map, individual resilience is at the top. It's the visible outcomes, those leaves. The idea, of course, like any plant, any tree, being that if the root and the trunk aren't in place, the organizational layer, the team leadership layer, that the leaves, i.e. the people, they can't thrive.
Yeah.
However, and I think our approach can be critiqued by some for saying that it focuses too much on organization and not enough on people. And to that, I say, I hear you. I really firmly believe that individuals have a role. As I said, I've spent my whole career in employee experience, and yet I still believe, and my team will have heard me say this many times, that I am not responsible for your happiness. I am not responsible for making you anxiety free. That is your job. That is not my job. What I am responsible, and what the organizations are responsible for, is building a system and designing an environment that people can be resilient in. That the job of the organization is to design a culture that doesn't require people to be extraordinary just to survive the culture. You shouldn't have to be extraordinary to survive the culture that you're in. But what you have to do, and to anyone that feels like we've not talked enough yet about the individual layer, I do expect individuals to be responsible for their own sign, but those things will only be possible if the system around them has been created that allows them to do that.
I think I need to think a little bit back on the people that the first word that comes to mind when I think about some individuals, and I was like, this is what characterizes them: resilience. And these people, to me, they've always been not necessarily distant from the organization or the troubles of the organization, but have always maybe had an eye on the future versus so much on the past or so much on the current crisis. And they've always kind of managed to have an anchor somewhere in a future where we're doing better. And I felt that their attitude there specifically was also influencing the hope and the disbelief that we will be better for their peers as well. So they had a little bit of a power of, let's say, vision, but maybe a critical optimism around, yes, I recognize this crisis. They were very much into solving any crisis at any point in time, zero back off of there, right? Like full on 100% I'm here. But in the same time, they were also there. Do you see this in any way?
Yeah, I mean, in between the every 5-second refreshing of the screen, what I'm hearing you say is leaders that are able to both be in the moment and roll their sleeves up and help their teams through, whilst also focusing on the future and the next goal. And I think that's a remarkable trait to be able to have, and crucial in leadership, so far as when we do get through the crisis, we take a beat to discuss, recover, learn. Something that I know is a fault in my leadership style is not stopping enough to celebrate, commiserate, learn, because I will be too quickly on to the next thing. And it's something that I think a certain personality type has to actively unlearn, is how you can be the best leader in the world, which it sounds a lot of what you just described. I mean, that sounds like a really inspiring leader, as long as they take the moment to build that recognition, that recovery in. and check that everyone is still ready to sprint with them. So, you know, the leader's like, has got the motivation and the direction and the knowledge to be able to sprint and keep going to the next piece of the goal. But the others might not have that. And sometimes you've got to look around you and check that everyone is running with you rather than like limping and putting on a brave face. But ultimately they've all got stitches and they're winded and you just can't see it because you're so focused on the way forward.
Yeah. And to be honest, when I'm referring to these people, when I have them in, in my mind's eye, they're not leaders so much. They're actually informal leaders almost, right?
Yeah.
Like they are some pillars of the organization. They've been there. It doesn't really matter how long, but their presence is very kind of captured as these people are essential somehow.
Yeah, they've got the real culture carriers of the organization. Yeah. Crucial.
Yeah.
But I wonder with those people, because this is something you also see in organizations that struggle with resilience, is that they over rely on those people. And I have seen it happen. I've also been one of those people in previous organizations where the organization is only succeeding or it's only not failing because of an over reliance on certain individuals, where basically resilience fails when it's left to certain people to continually absorb the pressure. Yeah. And so a question I often ask clients in this space is, do you rely on a select group of high performers or high performing teams in order to get you through each stage? And if the answer to that is yes, great, let's pay them some more and give them some more time off. But also you are relying on that. You're relying on the leaves. You're back at the individual layer because something will not be working in the trunk or the roots.
So true. So true. So true. And now that we're at the truth phase, I really want to talk a little bit about the TruthWorks. The company that you're running together with Emily is called TheTruthWorks. What is the hardest truth you've had to tell an organization about their culture? And how did they react?
Good question. We actually just invested in culture work for our own business, and we also had hard truths given to us. So I think it's important to always look for truth wherever, whether if you're delivering it or you're asking for it. I think it's a really important part of our business. What's the most something that we do in all layers of our business with our colleagues or with our clients is we try and embody Kim Scott's radical candor approach. Now, when I talk about that with clients, what I'm saying to them is, I care about you and your business personally. I care about your success. I care about this proposition or whatever it is. I care about it personally. But I will also challenge you directly. I will also speak truth to power. I will also be honest to a fault. And if this isn't the kind of partnership that you need or want right now, then we won't be the right fit for you. What that does is give us a really enviable position of being able to, within a safe environment, speak honest truths all the time. I think maybe the hardest one I had I've had it a couple of times actually, is having to tell a CEO that he's no longer, or they are no longer the right leader for the culture or for the organization. And that be data led, it wasn't my opinion. It's led from the insights gathered from the exco, from the colleagues, from the business performance, and having to be in a strange position really, because you don't ever think you're going to do stuff like that as a culture consultant. And then you realize how important and significant culture is. And sort of being able to say that you're no longer the right fit or the right person to get this company to the next level. And the one I'm thinking of in particular cared so deeply about the business that they just couldn't see it for themselves. And that wasn't an easy thing to say. But as always, especially when you look at this through the lens of resilience, the signs are there. The people are quietly compensating for the gaps in leadership. There are bottlenecks, there are decisions that aren't being made, there are targets that are being missed, and you can see that people are starting to stopping to thrive. And I basically said, the organization that you want and that you love will not survive and can't take root in the environment you've currently created. And I've had a similar conversation twice, and obviously hundreds of things will have led to this, but in both organizations, the CEO did end up leaving within the year. And there'll be so many other factors that influence that choice. both for them and for the business. But I do think that culture plays a really important role in that.
And I think there is a certain value to admitting somehow. We have this saying, I don't know if it's in other languages, but in Romanian, you can't grow anything in the shade of a big oak.
Yeah,
when,
I love that.
when something has like expanded so much, and that's, they have a certain size that they grow, and then they just stay there for hundreds of years, but nothing under is, thriving or
Yeah.
growing or showing up.
How do you say that in Romanian?
No other thing grows under the shade of a big oak.
Yeah, that's lovely. I totally agree. You cannot design a resilient culture if you're asking everybody else to grow around one thing that can't or won't change.
Yeah.
And that thing could be a person, it could be a part of the culture, it could be a value, it could be a system or process that's broken. But it's much harder to do that, I think.
I find it also the work. So, for example, what I do around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and having conversations, doing audits with clients, creating somehow a new roadmap and system for them to follow. Sometimes I'm a bit disheartened, right? Because I feel I need to go back to basics with a lot of them, and I need to kind of create something that should have been there because we live in a modern society. But realities are realities, multiple of them, and ever changing somehow. So I always kind of need to remind myself why I'm there. How do I, impact this change, and not fall into, nothing ever changes, right? Into this kind of cynical mindset. How do
Yeah.
you maintain your own resilience? Because I'm sure you see a lot of things that you would like not to see. But then we need to remind ourselves what is the purpose of being in this conversation and in these structures.
It's a really good question. I'm not sure I have, like, I know intentionally. I think, like we talked about, obviously it is so individual, your take on resilience. What I do know, if I was to apply the same concept of, system design rather than demand, what I know is that I've got quite a tightly designed system to make this work and for me to be able to do my best work and live my best life. And I had to really intentionally design that system when I became an expat. And I no longer had the ease and the reliability of family, friends, and like no language barrier around me. And also in that time, I also became a mother, and that changes your what resilience looks like for you as well. So I think, how do I do it myself? Well, I have a tightly designed system at home that allows me to do my best work. My relationship with my husband is as integral to my business success as my relationship with my business partner. And I know that she would say the same, that we wouldn't be able to do what we do now if we didn't have a system at home that was working both with us and without us. But I think there's a values piece in there. I also work with clients who are genuinely ready for change and who want the radical honesty that we offer, and have a team that are able to challenge me, support me, that we can offer recovery time to each other. I think, one thing that we've talked about in this conversation is that resilience is not mindless endurance, and you should take the same lesson in your personal life. If when you feel like you have just been on that treadmill nonstop, that is mindless endurance. That's probably not resilience. So what are the strategic decisions that you need to make in your personal life that you would be advising a client on?
And for those who don't know, Ree, Sophie, Emily, they live by this. First of all, they have a 4-day work week, which I love. So I witnessed multiple times in our interactions how you cover for each other. Somebody's on holiday. It's a very kind of frequent somehow pause. I feel it's a very, very good and very, very healthy way of looking at things. And that happens when you've built this in, right? When you've planned for it and you've committed to it, and everybody.
We're not perfect. We're learning all the time how to do it. But I do think there's a lot of stuff that we have done, like the 4-day week, like the radical candor, like the remote work, that allows resilience in. It's not perfect, and I know that we, like every business, it's a continual effort to not get to endurance, but to get to resilience, and to
Yep.
not constantly sprint, especially when you're a small female-founded business that is continually punching above its weight. You know,
Yep.
that needs a level of stamina, but you can only have stamina if you have recovery, and that's what we try and build in and bake into where our business is designed as well.
And I love it. We are almost on time. Like we
Ah,
are. It runs fast. I know this.
yes.
If any questions anymore, everybody who's been commenting, really lovely comments. I've tried to put them on screen so everybody kind of sees a little bit the direct interaction. We'll take a question or two if we have time, but the system in the background, again, there is a lag for the video getting in the live, so they don't see this refresh that we see every 5 seconds. But you've held on heroically. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll fix it for next time. But everybody who's joined us, do check the TruthWorks, do check their work. I think it's really interesting to understand how organizations like the TruthWorks can not necessarily just give a restart to certain organizations and certain cultures, but I mean, I know we said a million times the word transformation, but
Mm.
really transform where we are going with certain strategies about the work that we do and the people who do the work. Now, because I know Rhiannon doesn't necessarily catch all my commentary, so the ones who are online, they are. Just to close, if we don't have any questions, tell us a little bit more about the white paper that is coming.
Sure. Well, it's been a real labour of love, actually. I've really enjoyed working on it, and really tried to get different perspectives in. And actually, the perspectives, including your own, Oana, really did. It validated the idea, but it also just added multi dimensions to it. You know, getting an AI expert to look at what resilience means, that led us to a whole interesting conversation. So yeah, the white paper is out on Wednesday next week, and it focuses on how to build it in through the design of your organization and where to start, because it can be quite a confronting piece of information to say you need to design it into your whole system, you need to bake it in. It is so much easier just to get a toolkit out to your managers.
Yeah.
And so the workshop the toolkit aims to help you get some of those little way in, so that you're not starting from scratch, but you're actually starting to think about how you can do it at each layer. And ultimately, it's landing this point that with change coming, like Gartner's stat that we in 2016 there was 2 enterprise level changes a year. Now in 2025 there's 13. So our colleagues are experiencing more than one change a month.
I'm burning out. I burn out only when hearing about it.
And that's just the professional level. Imagine all the changes happening in our personal lives or in the media. So that speed of pressure, that volume of change isn't going anywhere. And I think this really requires us to now have systems that will flex, not snap. And so really what it's hopefully inspiring some action towards is cultural architecture design, and ultimately the understanding that resilience is not a trait, it's an outcome. And on that, I have completely lost you, Oana.
You're back. You're back. You're back. Cultural architecture. We were there.
Yes. And just the understanding that ultimately for me and for the TruthWorks, resilience is not a trait. It's an outcome. And once you shift to that mindset, it becomes a lot easier and different in how you actually approach it at work.
So people will go and they can download this toolkit, right? Or they need to.
Yeah, you can just log on. You can just log on to the website. You can actually put your email address in now, and you'll get it emailed when it comes through on Wednesday. Or you'll be able to access it on our website as well.
Lovely.
And we'll of course share things on LinkedIn.
What should they do with it first? And then after. So let's say I read it. What do I do after I read it? That's my question. Like I read this report. What do I do as the next step?
You send it to your CEO.
Okay. Sent out.
Yeah. And then you open up a conversation about how much of resilience in your organization is currently resting on the individuals, but how many of the problems are focusing on the roots or the trunk. And you ask yourself, if our problems are at roots or trunk, why do we focus our time on the leaves?
Because everything matters, right? The roots, the trunk, the leaves.
Of course, they all do, but it's so much easier to put the responsibility onto the colleagues and to make this something that sits with HR as something that can be ticked off with annual resilience training. That is one part of it. I'm not being cynical about the opportunity that you've got there, but it can't be the only part. Not when the sort of the trunk and the roots haven't been assessed properly.
Rhiannon, thank you so much for being with us today and
Thank
for
you.
your patience with our system. I think it's just too hot in Barcelona and everything on my desk is just, I don't know what's happening. But this has been a wonderful session. I hope you enjoyed it as well. There are a lot of comments, so I hope you'll have some continued conversations there. For us, resilience is in general, especially with the work that we do around the workplace inclusion, is part of it. Like there is no other way, because what we deal with is in general crisis, whether it's harassment, like basically literally things that are going to court or are lawsuit related, or behavior, culture things. So the whole infrastructure of how people interact with their workplace and how the workplace offers to them a place where they, as you say, can be resilient. That is definitely what we all the time look for. Carly, Marie, Jessica, Marie Claire, Emily, everybody who's been with us today, thank you so much. Share this. The video remains online forever and ever. It is out there on the internet.
I won't watch it.
Do share it in your network with your colleagues, and definitely download the white paper. I'm very much looking forward to read it as well on Wednesday. And we'll see you soon. We'll see you soon somewhere in Amsterdam, in Berlin, in Barcelona, or in the ether. I am very much looking forward to continue our conversations. Thank you so much.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, everyone.
Ciao, everyone. See you next week.
Bye.